Welcome to Let's Rewatch It Again. Guess what? I just shot a bear. I would never shoot a bear, just to be clear. I love bears. They're my favorite animal, specifically polar bears. And that is what Sawyer shoots in this episode. Y'all are not ready. Today we are rewatching The Lost Pilot Part 2. Yeah, that's right. These two parts of a pilot episode for a crazy amazing TV show aired separately, an entire week apart. Now, I was super late to the whole Lost game, about 5 years, so I had the privilege of binging on Hulu back when I believe Hulu was free? ? I know, that's a super long time ago. However, I got to binge and had no idea that these things were separated by a week, 2 weeks, or that sometimes, way back when, we would have issues where March Madness would happen and you'd have several weeks between episodes of your favorite TV shows. Now, normally with a Lost episode, it begins with the voice of Jack Shephard's father saying, "Previously on Lost." That doesn't actually happen at the beginning of this episode, but it really should, especially since the part 1 was aired an entire week ago and maybe you missed it. This is the second half of a massive premiere, and if you haven't heard part 1 of this episode, hit the pause button, head back to the show. You need to listen to Lost Pilot Part 1, or go to the YouTube channel, Let's Rewatch It Again podcast, and watch Lost Part 1. You gotta do it. You gotta do it. You're gonna miss so much. And then you can come on and listen to part 2, because otherwise nothing is gonna make sense. Our episode opens with Jack, Charlie, and Kate walking through a sun-filled jungle. 2 seconds ago, it was a massive downpour, dark black clouds in the sky, and now we have sunshine and bright green leaves, and everything seems peaceful. Where is this island? What is going on? Charlie keeps asking Jack if the transceiver is working, and it's definitely not. And meanwhile, Kate asks Charlie what he was doing in the bathroom, because if you remember, in the cockpit, Jack and Kate were talking to the actual pilot of the plane before the monster ripped him out of it, and Charlie was nowhere to be seen, and then Kate found him in the bathroom. And he's like, "Oh, I thought it was obvious. I was getting sick. My one amazing contribution to the trip." And she's like, "You did more than that." And he's like, "No, I'm a coward." And in the kindest voice possible, almost too soft to be true, she says, "You're not a coward." Oh my God, she barely knows him, but she still says that. Kate sees the best in people. And then we close in on Charlie, and his face darkens with the memory of the moments before the crash. And we see what he was really up to. He's sitting in his plane seat, fidgeting, and he's like tapping the drive shaft ring against the metal piece of the armrest on the plane. And he's fidgeting so much that the flight attendant, the one with the Australian accent, by the way, her name is Cindy, she asks him if he's all right. And instead of playing it cool or making up a lie, like, "I'm not a very good flyer," or something, or maybe just be charming, he gets rude. Well, okay, it's a British version of rude, because honestly, British people just aren't that rude. At least their accent makes it sound like they are being way more polite than they probably are. And he says, "I'm fine, please." Cindy leaves but recruits 2 male flight attendants, and they pursue Charlie, who jumps up from his chair and starts to run down the aisle. And then he cuts across some seats and steps on what we assume is Shannon's foot. And she just does this little "excuse me," which I have to say, I feel like it's just not quite right. I don't feel like Shannon would say "excuse me." I feel like she would have said "hey," or something. But "excuse me" is fine. I also really love the tiny ways that all of our characters are crossing paths in just minuscule ways, because all of them seem to have interacted somehow on the plane, at the airport, in some way before they reach the island. Charlie makes it into the bathroom and turbulence is shuddering the plane. Honestly, get back in your seat. He takes off his right shoe and reveals a tiny bag of, it's not flour. Okay. He pinches some of it into his hand, and we cut away while he sniffs, we'll say, I'm not really sure how I want to describe that more, so if you don't know, watch the episode. It becomes very clear. The attendants are knocking on the door the entire time and saying, Sir, excuse me, sir. He ties the knot of the tiny plastic bag, and it looks like there is a lot of knot flour in this bag. I mean, I don't know anything about that sort of situation. I don't know what is a lot or a little, but just as he's about to drop the tiny bag into the open toilet, bam, he hits the ceiling because we have dropped from the sky into what Jack assumes was about 200 feet in the air. He scrambles out of the bathroom and makes it into a seat and gets an oxygen mask on, and that's when we cut away. So now we know why Charlie wanted to make it to the cockpit. He's an addict, and that's heartbreaking. Because if you know the rest of the series, you know that they're not going to be rescued anytime soon. We also witness that Sawyer is a smoker, and those are going to run out at some point too. And it's like the island is literally forcing you to break any habit you possibly had in life. Our commercial break brings us to Shannon tanning amidst the wreckage, like she's just on a messy, crowded beach. The image of her lying in an orange bikini with the plane smoking in the background is unreal. And she's so calm. Again, Shannon is in so much denial right now. I don't blame her, but it is incredible to see. And it makes me wonder if anyone else on the beach is experiencing the same type of denial, but expressing it in a different way than she is. Because with different personalities and different backgrounds, you're just going to express pain and trauma and fear in very different ways. Boone comes over and tells her that she needs to help organize luggage. I see you found your bag. That would be nice to find your own bag, I have to admit. And she tells him that he's wasting his time. He walks off, and Claire asks if that's her boyfriend, and we find out that Boone and Shannon are brother and sister. Terrible fact that almost became a reality. Boone was nearly named 5. Because he's a 5th in the line of like men named the same names. When does it end, people? Like, when do you just stop naming them the same names? Like, it's gotta stop. And I'm really glad that he's named Boone instead of 5 for the show purposes, but like, I know it's most likely after Daniel Boone, but like, that's not a whole lot better. Like, it's just not. It's, ugh. We get an upward shot from the side of Shannon's face, blurred in the foreground, and see that Claire is in the upper half, pulling off a double layer of her tank tops. And she's looking at Shannon and goes, I used to have a stomach. And Shannon rolls over and asks her if she knows what it is, as in the baby. And Claire says, not yet. I haven't felt the baby move since yesterday. I love that Shannon is at first like propped up on her elbows, and as she hears this, she slides down and hides her face in her arms and is just barely peeking over to look at Claire. And we finally begin to see the slow fade of reality dawning on our Sandy princess. The next camera shot, I absolutely love. The camera is looking down into some shallow pools of water at a sea urchin, and a hand carefully reaches in and plucks out the sea urchin. That's the scary thing with all the needles sticking out, okay? And how is he doing this? It's Jen, by the way. He's fishing by hand. Okay, that alone is impressive, but the fact that you picked up a sea urchin and you came out unscathed is incredible to me. My sister was actually stung by a sea urchin not too long ago, and the needles stay in your skin. Yeah, you can't pull them out with tweezers. No. They have to dissolve by themselves over time. Terrifying. Michael comes up and asks if Jen and Sun have seen his boy, and of course they don't understand what he's saying, but Sun tries to speak to him in Korean, and we don't get subtitles here because, as the rule of the show, if an English speaker is present, we don't get to be in on the secret as viewers. Well, we don't get to be in on the language, I should say. It's not a secret. If you know Korean, then you get to hear exactly what she's saying, which is unbelievably cool. As a person that only speaks one language and random phrases of others, I'm jealous. But yeah, I'm just not gifted at languages. I hate to say, because I would really love that. Jin shouts in Korean at Sun, and she quickly buttons the top button of her cardigan. And if you were uncertain about Jin before, now you really hate him. At least I do. There's just something about that moment that feels so... it bothers me in a way that I can't describe. It just fills me with rage. Let's put it that way. Then we cut to Walt, who is walking through the outskirts of the jungle. We can kind of see that the beach is close by behind him, so he's not deep in the jungle, thank goodness, because he's just a child. And he has Vincent's leash in hand, and he's like kind of whisper yelling out the dog's name, which is smart because he knows there's a monster of some kind out there. Walt listens to the jungle, and it's almost like we can hear something with him, even though there's nothing to hear. And he finds a pair of handcuffs on the ground. Okay, what? Then Michael jump scares us and scolds Walt for leaving the beach. And Walt tries to say that he felt like he was still close to the beach and he thought that would be okay. And then, I don't know, Michael is just like, I mean what I say. And, listen, I'm not a parent, but as a child, I can definitely say that when adults use phrases like, do what I say, I mean what I say, it's because I said so, there's just no meaning behind those sentences. And if anything, it just makes you feel smaller, less understood, and more prone to not listen to that person, because if they're always saying things that don't mean anything to you, there's nothing to listen to anyways. Also, it's interesting that we know they are father and son, but their dynamic is really odd. They almost seem like they are playing parts in a play, and that they were given a script, but they're only given that script like page by page, and they don't know the ending. We cut to Saeed punching Sawyer in the face, and the vivid image and sound of it is visceral. It's kind of amazing. And the two of them get into a huge brawl on the beach, and everybody is watching. And then finally, Jack grabs Sawyer, and Michael is there to pull Saeed away. And Sawyer claims that Saeed is the one that crashed the plane. Okay, I just got to break down these two characters for you right quick. Saeed is brown. Yeah, okay. That is why Sawyer thinks that he possibly crashed the plane. Sawyer is, no offense to him, I understand some people like this on some teensy level. Sawyer is from the South of America. He's white, blonde hair, blue eyes, tall, and strong. He doesn't have a lot of the world against him, except for the fact that he is poor with an accent. And that's not really a whole lot, especially when everyone else around you has that same accent. And Saeed is Middle Eastern with the most incredible curly hair that rivals Kate's curly hair. And I want to know their curl routine, because as a curly haired person, I want Kate's hair. I want Saeed's hair. It's gorgeous all the time. Now, of course, they're in the salty beach air, which is definitely giving them some volume and texture and like uniformity to their curls that just doesn't happen naturally. Or at least like it helps naturally, I guess, let's say. But I digress. Sawyer wrongfully assumes that Saeed is the reason why they crashed, because he saw him sitting at the back row of business class, which is not the same as first class. There's first class, then business, and then the rest of the plane follows. And he says that Saeed had his arms folded in his lap with a blanket covering it, and that the guy next to him didn't make it. And I love that Saeed says, "Thank you so much for observing my behavior." I mean, it's interesting. I will say that later we discover that Sawyer is a con man, and so he reads people for a living. Now, does that mean that he reads people correctly? No. It means that he clearly makes a lot of assumptions about people because he's a con man. He assumes who he can con and who's going to be a good story for him or who's going to be a good plan for him. And clearly, he's wrong sometimes. Michael tries to break up the fight and also kind of help by saying, "My kid found these in the woods," and he holds up the handcuffs. And Sawyer reveals that Saeed was pulled out of line at the airport. Interesting. At this remark, Saeed lunges at Sawyer and the men have to pull them apart again. And then Kate yells, "Stop!" It's deep, throaty, and it sounds like she has yelled at men doing this before. We discover way later that Kate is also from like southern/middle America. And I feel like she grew up with men like Sawyer. So none of this is a surprise to her. None of this is new. All of this is very familiar. Now, I do want to say about Sawyer, it's really interesting that his character developed the way that it did, because originally he was supposed to be a fancy con man in like a suit and be really like kind of uppity and believe that he's above everyone else. But Josh Holloway showed up and they were like, wait a minute, this is more interesting. So they allowed him to keep his southern drawl. They allowed him to keep the intelligence of the original con man, but made him more of a like skeevy kind of character with a very dark past and a very dark reason for doing what he does. And they also gave him this really interesting voice to fit the actual actor's style of speech. And so that's why we don't hear him speak in part one, is because they were still trying to figure out how Josh's style of speech and how his accent was going to play into the character that was transforming before them. It's really kind of cool. And it actually reminds me of how in Sweet Home Alabama, Jake is talking to Melanie and he says, honey, just because I talk slow don't mean I'm stupid. And I just want us to remember that Sawyer read incorrectly what he believed about Saeed. And it would be very easy to read back the same thing about Sawyer, is to assume that just because he's Southern and white, but also that he's dumb. And he definitely should not be underestimated. That's for sure. Kate announces they found the transceiver, but it's not working. Who can help with that? And Saeed raises his hand and says, I might be able to help. And Sawyer's like, great, let's trust this guy. And Hurley calls out, hey, we're all in this together. We have to learn how to respect each other. And then Sawyer does the unthinkable and yells, shut it, Lardo. Jack steps up to Sawyer and tells him to take a break. And I love this moment so much. Sawyer's dark gaze is meaner than the scariest shark in the sea. And he says, whatever you say, Doc, you're the hero. And a villain is born. Oh my God. Full body chills every time. Because we see this amazing, amazing foil of Jack and Sawyer. Jack, the man who does not judge anyone upon meeting them. And Sawyer, who judges everybody upon meeting them. Jack the hero, Sawyer the villain. I mean, it's so good. Boone asks if they found the cockpit and if there were survivors. And so begins the many lies to Boone. Right to his face, Jack says, no. And kind of looks down. I mean, clearly he's lying. And, I mean, technically the pilot survived, but then he died. So it's not a full lie, but it's not helpful. Then Rose alerts Jack that he needs to check on the guy with the shrapnel in his chest. Ooh, I like that we're getting a moment to remember that there are still wounded people on the beach and that Jack's job is clearly never finished. Hurley joins Saeed at a small fire and says, chain-smoking jerk. Actually, he says a different word, but I grew up without cursing, and so I am incapable of doing so. And Saeed says, some people have problems. And then Hurley goes, yeah, us, him. And Saeed smiles at this, and I love that Hurley is making Saeed not feel like an outsider. And he's just like a magical being. Like, Hurley can make anyone feel like a buddy, a friend, a confidant. I mean, he just has a way of doing that with people, and it's really incredible. And then Hurley says, you're okay. I like you. And Saeed goes, you're okay too. And Hurley laughs like, well, of course I am. And Hurley holds out his hand and then says his own name and then realizes that Saeed has hands busy with the transceiver. However, Saeed puts it down and offers his hand and his own name. And Hurley asks him, how do you know how to do all that? And here's where we begin to learn about Saeed, because he says, I was a communications officer. And Hurley goes, really? Did you ever see battle? And then Saeed says that he fought in the Gulf War, and Hurley's like, oh, a connection. And he says that he had a buddy that fought in the Gulf War. 104th Airborne? What were you? Air Force? Army? And we kind of like sweep the camera into Saeed's face, and he says, "The Republican Guard." And the camera again like clips him back and forth, and then Saeed makes eye contact with Hurley, and Hurley makes this, "Oh," face. I have to say, this is one of my favorite moments in the entire series. I was only in 7th grade when 9/11 happened, and I know that that is not the same as the Gulf War, but that's the thing that I personally have to relate to. When I got home from school that day, there was lots of news footage of Iraq and Afghanistan. Later, we find out that Saeed is from Iraq. Before this day, I had never heard of Iraq, Afghanistan, nothing like that. And I was watching footage of actual people's homes, like women, children, pets, just people going about their day. And that day for me, I feared that my dad was around the age that he could be drafted to go to a war that had just begun that day. You know, like I didn't know about anything yet. No one knew what we were going to do or what was going to happen. But as I watched, I wondered if there was another 12-year-old girl on the other side of the world worried about the same thing and wondering if her father was going to have to go to war because of something that someone else did. And I know that might sound really odd, but that day connected me with someone that I'll never meet, most likely, or never know. But just the idea that someone on the other side of the world was experiencing that in the same day that I was, but in a totally different way. I just really love the scene between Hurley and Saeed, realizing that in the real world, they probably never would have spoken, even on the plane, past a "oh, excuse me," as you're walking past them to like get to the restroom or something. Or maybe just, I don't know, brushing past them at the airport. And you wouldn't think twice about it. And now the two of them are stuck on an island together, working together to be rescued and keep the peace and somehow becoming friends. I don't know. I just really love it. And I think that's the magic of this show, is that it's kind of like Survivor. It's an island where all of these strangers are having to create their own society amidst all of the chaos and a lot of differences, not just in backgrounds, but culture and ethnicity and language and preconceived notions about who other people are. And it's so amazing. And honestly, I think that's why the story is so incredible. Not because of the supernatural elements or the mystery of the island or the crash itself, but the people, the characters that unfold on this beautiful, beautiful show. Camera sweeps across these like beautiful sparkling ocean waves. And from afar, we see that Kate is washing in the surf, and she's standing in just her underclothes. And so she's very like vulnerable physically. And then when we pull up to her face, we see that she has been crying, wrecked with emotion. And the music is soft and soulful, and she's tying her hair up on her head in a way that I have to admit I watched several times to figure out how she made that messy bun look so easy, but also super cool. And we hear Sun calling out to her in Korean from the shore. And I love the juxtaposition of Kate standing in her underwear and bra, vulnerable not only physically, but emotionally from the day that she's had, the day that everyone has had, including yesterday. And she looks up and nods to a fully clothed woman who was literally told a few minutes ago to button up by her own husband. God, this show, they don't even speak the same language, and yet, aren't they? We cut to Kate, now dressed in orange and ill-fitting jeans because I don't think she found her own bag yet. And she talks to Saeed about how to make the transceiver work. And he's gotten to the point where he's like, I can get a signal, but the problem is that we are far too low. We need to get to a high point, as high as possible, so that the signal can reach farther, and we only have a little bit of battery, so we can't waste it. The coolest thing happens with this is that the music like swells and gets very like, I mean, I'm not even going to pretend like I can make the music sounds. But the camera pans upward through the island mountains, cutting back and forth to Kate's face and the green mountains, showing that they're going higher and higher and higher. And she's pulling back her hair, overwhelmed by the sheer height of this island and how high they're going to really have to climb to get a signal to reach as far as possible. Kate finds Jack trying to fix the shrapnel guy. He's not doing well. He might not make it. especially if Jack can't open him up and get him proper antibiotics. He needs a rescue team. And Kate tells Jack that Saeed fixed the transceiver, but they need to get to a high point for the signal. And Jack says it's not safe to go on a hike. And Kate makes a really good point of, what makes you think we're safer here on the beach? Because there's no way to know that. And he's like, okay, well, wait for me. And she says, no, he needs you here. They all do. And he's like, all right, well, if you see anything, if you hear anything, and then longest pause ever, run. A boom of a poof. It's a classic Lost sound. Cuts us to Jin and Sun. Jin has cleaned and cut the fish and is separating the pieces into like small little airline cups on a tray. And Sun reaches for a piece and he slaps her hand. And if I wasn't in a rage before, now I am literally a bonfire about to take out his entire forest. Like I've had it with Jin. I've had it. When he walks away, she unbuttons the top button and glares after him. It's the tiniest but very real act of defiance that tells us that Sun is not a doormat, my friends, okay? She is not to be trifled with.
I am not to be truffled with.
Jin tries to offer the fish to Hurley, who is like, absolutely not. And I love their interaction because Jin is trying to convince him in Korean and Hurley is trying to convince him right back in English, like, no, there's no way. He says that he's starving, but he's nowhere near that hungry. And he laughs and says, no, thank you. No. And he just keeps laughing as Jin walks off like, I tried. And listen, I don't eat seafood. I would definitely die on this island. And I'm with Hurley on this one. I guess I would eventually have to try it, but I really hate it. It's gross. It smells funny. It looks funny. All of the above. Walt has found a Spanish comic book with a roaring polar bear inside, which is very cool to see because who knows what this comic book is about, who the characters are, but there's like this giant polar bear face and I love it. And he's just paging through it and Michael asks him if he reads Spanish and Walt says, no, I just found it. And then Michael makes a huge mistake by saying, when we get home, I'll get you another dog. You basically just told your son that your dog is dead. I can't. It's not helping, bro. It's not. We catch Charlie pulling out his bag of not flour and shaking it into his hand. And in between this, we cut back and forth to Jack telling Hurley to gather up any medicine they can find and that what they really need is anything that ends in mycin or psyllin. Those are antibiotics. And I love that we're cutting into this. We're cutting back and forth between talking about very different types of drugs. Well, Shannon has finally accepted reality of the crash. She's curled up on the beach, hugging her legs into her chest and staring at a body of who we can assume is a flight attendant because he's wearing like a suit and she's sobbing openly. And Boone slumps down next to her and asks her what she's doing. And she says, I think I was mean to him. And he's like, what? She says, well, he wouldn't let us have our seats in first class. He saved our lives. And Boone is disgusted with her and says, you're being worthless. You should really help out instead of just sitting here crying. And she's like, excuse me, I've been through a trauma here. And he says, we've all been through a trauma, Shannon. The difference is that you have given yourself a pedicure since yesterday. And she says, you know what? It is so easy to make fun of me. And they start arguing back and forth. And I just want to say again that we all digest trauma in very different ways. We don't get to judge each other. And I think it's really unfair of him to judge her because he does know her. Or at least he thinks he does. I firmly believe that Boone believes he knows who Shannon is. And I think he's wrong. And I don't just say that because I prefer Shannon over Boone. But I do definitely believe that Shannon is much deeper than she allows people to see. And she says that he has no idea what she's thinking. And he's like, oh, really? And she says, I'm going on the hike. Yep. And Shannon approaches Kate and Saeed and announces that she's going with them. And they both look at each other like, oh, I don't know about that. And Boone tries to argue with her and also belittles her at the same time. And Kate's like, I'm not sure that's a good idea. And Shannon's like, oh, really? What are you, like 2 years older than me? And the camera like pans in a circle around them as they argue. And we see that Saeed is covering his mouth, trying not to laugh. Like, what is happening right now? Then Charlie comes up and she's like, "You're going, aren't you?" And he's like, "Oh, well, if you're going." And she's like, "Yep, I'm definitely going." And he's like, "Oh, then I am definitely going." He's going because Shannon is hot. That's it. That's Kate says that everybody can come, but they're leaving right now. And as they're all walking off, Charlie goes, "You can't tell by that, but she's actually really nice." Man, I love the comedic relief of Charlie. Yes! The score softens and we get this really interesting view of Sawyer sitting in a half ring of what was once a plane engine. His face is all wrinkled up in grief, and it's hard to see exactly what it is that he's so upset about. It's not the fight with Michael or anything like that. This is something very different. He's holding a piece of paper in his hands that has been folded many times, possibly folded and unfolded several times over its life. And he sees our hiking group trotting off and decides to join them, but doesn't say anything. He just kind of like passes them up. And Kate looks up and goes, "You decided to join us?" And of course, that emotional moment of Sawyer that we got to see is not seen by them because he goes, "I'm a complex guy, sweetheart." All right, Sawyer. A score that, to me, is very iconic Lost theme plays as the group climbs up like a slick cliffside. It's like all this like loose dirt, and they're using roots and each other to try to like climb up. I'm sorry, I don't think anyone was ready for this type of action. This looks like advanced hiking to me, and who was ready for that? Who signed up for this? We cut back to the beach where Jack is rifling through luggage looking for something, I'm assuming medicine. And honestly, at this point, we really need to start inventorying what do we have on this beach? And Michael asks what he's looking for, and Jack answers some sort of blade. Oh, God. Jack asks about Walt, which is a really nice thing to do since Michael has a son. And Michael's like, "Oh, he'll be all right." And Jack asks how old Walt is, and Michael answers uncertainly, 9, 10, 10. Michael says Walt is actually more worried about his dog than anything else. He was on the plane, so... And then Jack's like, "Was he a lab?" "Yeah. Oh, I saw him yesterday. Just over there, about 200 yards or so. He looked good." Hearing this, Michael gets up and starts to head off in the direction that Jack was gesturing. And it's like, dude, the dog is not going to be in the same place that they were a minute ago, but okay. Jack finds an old shaving blade, like the kind they used at a barber shop, and we get a close-up of what that looks like. And if we're going to use this to cut somebody open or pretend it's a scalpel, so not the same thing. Then we get a great camera shot of a fancy-looking board game. It looks almost like antique-like, or like someone paid a lot of money for it. And Locke is setting it up. And again, we still have not found out who this Locke guy is. We just keep seeing him, and now we're finally going to talk to him. Walt stands behind him and asks if the game he's playing is like checkers, and Locke says it's way better than checkers. "Do you play checkers with your pop?" "No, I live in Australia with my mom." "You don't have an accent." "No, we move a lot. She died a couple weeks ago." And then Locke still has not even really responded, just says, "You've had a bad month." Walt finally comes around and sits down across from him, and Locke begins to explain the game the only way that Locke can explain anything, which is not how you thought he was going to. He says the game of backgammon goes all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia, 5,000 years ago. That's older than Jesus Christ. He literally sounds like a history teacher right now. It's kind of impressive, but also like, who is this guy in real life? And then Walt asks him if they had dice and stuff back then. And Locke nods and says, "Yeah, but their dice was made of bones." Why is everything you say sound so creepy? Walt thinks that this is cool. And honestly, this is when I begin to realize that these two are like the halves of the same coin. You know, like they just... I don't know. It's really interesting, especially when you know the entire series. You look back at this moment and you're like, whoa, they really knew the ending all the way back at the beginning, as much as they pretend like they didn't. This is very interesting. Locke continues saying that there are two players, two sides, and he holds up a white game piece and a black game piece in the other hand and says one is light, one is dark. And we get up so close into Locke's face and he says, "Well, do you want to know a secret?" And then we ease into Walt's expression, as we see him hear whatever this secret is, but we still don't know. I love that. I love that basically we go completely silent and just watch Walt take it in, looking at Locke like, huh. Claire is writing in a journal, curled up on two connected business class seats like it's a couch. She's officially made herself home on the beach, which is kind of adorable. Jin offers her the fish and is speaking in Korean, and I assume he's doing this to get into people's good graces, but I don't like how he treats Sun. So I don't care how much fish you offer to other people. If they see how you treat your wife, it's not gonna be good, bro. Claire says no thank you at first, but he keeps talking and gesturing to his stomach, indicating that it's for the baby. And she's like, well, okay. So she takes an orange piece, and the second that she swallows it, the baby begins to respond by jumping in her belly. So she bounces up from the chairs and starts like yelling like, the baby's moving, the baby's moving. She grabs Jin's hand and puts it on her belly, and she's like, there's a foot, there's a foot. And Jin gets really upset by this and pulls away from her, and he's like yelling at Korean and rushes away. And then she goes, he's a he. I guess I think you're a he. And she's just holding her belly. It's such a sweet moment, because earlier when she was talking to Shannon, it was like, is the baby still okay? And now we know that the baby is okay. And that's such a relief, honestly. Our hiking group has now reached an area of like sparsed apart trees with very tall grass as high as their hips. And Sawyer is arguing they should check the reception because it's a nice open field. It's not really that open, but okay. And Saeed claims that the battery won't last. And of course, Sawyer just keeps arguing because he thinks he's always right about absolutely everything. And Saeed starts yelling back at him, and then we hear a crash and a rumble in the very close distance. And they all look around like, is it the monster? But whatever it is, the camera clips back to this animal rushing through the brush. And it's not as big as that monster. It feels small but mighty, and it's like and then we keep cutting back to their faces, all panicking. Shannon is now full on screaming bloody murder and running. Boone is chasing after her, and she's like, I never should have come on the trip. And Saeed and Charlie start to run, but Kate doesn't want to leave anyone behind, Sawyer being that person. Saeed grabs Kate, pulls him along, but Sawyer stands his ground, pulls the gun out, and shoots the thing. Whatever it is goes down, and we hear it groaning and take its last exhale, which is just so disturbing. Our camera gazes up at Sawyer through like dingy white fur as the group gathers around to see that it is not the monster that they thought, but a bear. And Shannon says, that's a big bear. It's a polar bear. So like I said, polar bear is my favorite animal, not because of this. I just really love bears, and Baloo specifically from the Jungle Book. And I really love cold, so polar bears, you know? Boone asked if that's what killed the pilot, and I had a second where I was like, how does he possibly know that? Jack lied to him. And then Charlie says, no, that is a teeny tiny version of compared to that. And it's like, oh, you know what? Jack is the kind of guy that would come back from an experience like that and not want everyone to panic about what happened. Charlie is the kind of guy that comes back and he's like, have I got a story for you? We finally get a look at the animal, and Kate says, it's a polar bear. And then we, boom, back to the beach where Hurley has been enlisted to help Jack with the shrapnel guy. And Hurley asks if they're sure that he's out, because apparently whatever Jack is going to do is not going to be cute. And Jack's like, yeah, of course. And then Hurley leans over him and goes, hey guy, you awake? And he's like, yo, there's a rescue plane. We're saved. Yay. Oh yeah, he's out. Dang it. Even Jack laughs at this and smiles. Like, Jack is smiling. I'm telling you that anyone that Hurley is around just feels better about life, even just for a moment. And then Hurley's like, so what am I gonna exactly? And Jack explains that he probably won't, but if he regains consciousness, I need you to hold him down. Ugh. And Hurley's like, I'm not so good with blood. Well, then don't look. Yeah, but I'm not so good with blood. Jack, why did you enlist Hurley to help you with this? Like, was there no one else on the beach that you trusted even a little bit besides the guy that probably shouldn't have to handle this with you? I think that sometimes doctors forget that we are not like them. Some of us just don't belong in the operating room, and that's okay. Hurley moves to kneel over Shrapnel Guy's head and hold onto his shoulders. And Jack instructs him not to look, which his head is right over the guy's chest. So all Hurley is doing is turning his head to the side, and we get a close-up shot of Jack's hands pulling the metal piece out of the guy's rib cage, and Hurley flinches and goes, "Oh, dude." And Jack is like, "Hand me those strips." "Dude, just hand me those strips." "I don't think I can." "Just hand me the..." "Why, what's going on?" And then Hurley looks down, really bad plan, and then his eyes start to roll back in his head, and Jack is like, "Don't even think about it. Hurley, hey!" And then Hurley has passed out beside the guy in the sand. He tried to warn him. We cut back to the hiking group arguing about how a polar bear could possibly live in the tropical jungle, and Kate asks Sawyer, "Where did that come from?" And he's like, probably Bear Village." Yep, that right there, that is the Sawyer voice. That is the Sawyer tone, the words, the jokes, the sarcasm. That is who Sawyer is, right there all the time. He's a good one-liner, let me tell you. And then Kate's like, "Not the bear, the gun." And then he says that he got it off one of the bodies, and Saeed repeats this back to him in disbelief, like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah, one of the bodies." And Shannon's like, "People don't carry guns on planes." And then Sawyer says, "They do if they're U.S. Marshals, sweet cheeks." Yeah, there's another one. Oh my gosh. And then he says that there was one on the plane. And Kate asks him how he knows that. And Sawyer's like, "I saw a guy lying there with a holster, so I took the gun. Thought it might come in handy. Guess what? I just shot a bear." He looks way too proud of himself about this. I can't. Then they ask him, why does he think that this guy was a marshal? And he's like, "'Cause he had a clip-on badge. I took that too. Thought it'd be cool." And here we have our first look at how big of a thief Sawyer is. He's basically the pack rat of the beach, to be honest. Saeed says, "I know who you are. You're the prisoner." Whew, those are big words. And honestly, it sounds like it could be correct. And Saeed continues and says, "You found a gun on a U.S. Marshal because you knew where it was. Because you were the one he was bringing back to the States." Oh my God. And then the camera is focused on Kate as Saeed is speaking these words. And he keeps continuing and he says, "Those handcuffs were on you. That's how you knew. You are the prisoner." And then Sawyer goes, "Fine, I'm the criminal. You're the terrorist. We'll all play a part. Who do you want to be?" And looks at Shannon. As he's speaking, Kate creeps up closer to him, snatches the gun out of his hand, and points it at him. Everyone but Sawyer backs up. Sawyer is so not afraid of guns. And I think that says a lot. Kate asks the group, "Does anyone know how to use a gun?" And Charlie's like, "I think you just pull the trigger." Is he just inviting Kate to just end Sawyer now so they can just be rid of him? And then Saeed says, "Don't use the gun." Kate claims that she just wants to take it apart. And I gotta be honest here. I grew up in a house that was comfortable with like hunting type of guns. We didn't have any small handguns or anything lethal like that. This was only for hunting. And I have to say, you don't ever point a gun at somebody unless you intend to harm them with it, especially if you know that gun is loaded. And in my mind, every single gun is loaded. Always think of it like that. That is what I was taught. And so the fact that Kate is pointing it at Sawyer like this is really dangerous, whether or not she knows how to use a gun. And I feel like she does. Saeed instructs her that there's a button on the grip and then mentions a magazine, and he's telling her all of these things, and she is following these instructions way too well. Like I said, I grew up with guns. I don't know what the grip is. I don't know what the magazine is. Like, I think I do, but if you handed me a small handgun and told me how to take it apart with those words, I would literally not know what to do with it. I feel like this is highly suspicious, except only Sawyer takes note of the fact that she seems to understand and already kind of know all this information and is just kind of playing a part, like he said. He's smiling the entire time with these super deep cheek dimples that are just, Too attractive, it's a problem. Once the gun is unloaded and taken apart, she hands the gun back to Sawyer. He grabs her arm and pulls her in close to him and says, "I know your type." And she's like, "I'm not so sure." And then he says, "I've been with girls like you, not girls exactly like me." Sawyer is still smiling and chuckles as he lets her go. Saeed looks like he now officially wants to use the gun on Sawyer, and Charlie looks disgusted by this whole ordeal, specifically Sawyer. Kate walks a few feet away from the group and steps behind a tree trunk and leans against it, and a disembodied female voice brings us back to the plane before the crash, asking if they want anything else. The camera is close up on Kate's face, surrounded by soft, clean curls, and she says she doesn't need anything, and the flight attendant turns to her seatmate. "What about you, sir? Cocktail? Soda?" It's the shrapnel guy. I mean, she did say that they sat next to each other, so it makes sense. And then the shrapnel guy, he says, "Just coffee, sweetheart." Black. Ugh, I hate this guy already. And you know what? So does the attendant. She looks beyond pissed to be called sweetheart and leaves as quickly as she can. And then Shrapnel says to her, "You look nervous, but you gotta stay positive, kiddo. There's always the off chance they could believe your story. I know I do." And then she says, "I don't care what you believe." Okay, so these two know each other seemingly very well. And he mockingly asks her if she wants something besides juice. And she's like, "Yeah, I'm sure." She ducks her head and starts to lift the cup. And we hear the clatter of metal as the handcuffs clink against the plastic tray table. Because she is chained to her seatbelt. Because she's the criminal and he's the U.S. Marshal. Oh my God. When I tell you, when I saw this for the first time, full body chills. I think I even screamed out loud. Like maybe not like a shriek the way that Shannon does, but I definitely had a massive reaction. In my mind, that's the coolest twist that we have here. It's not Sawyer, the guy that is on everybody's bad list. It's not Saeed just because he's a brown guy. It's not Charlie just because he does drugs. It's Kate, the sweet heroine who is trying everything she can to rescue everybody. What? The plane shudders and we get the seatbelt voiceover warning again, and then the plane stabilizes and she leans into the marshal and says, "Can I just ask you for one favor?" And he's like, "Oh, this ought to be good." And then boom, the plane jerks, the alarm goes off, a man close by is thrown toward the ceiling of the plane, and a metal carry-on falls from above and crashes into the marshal's head, knocking him unconscious, and now he's full on bleeding. Kate struggles to get the oxygen mask, but she can't reach it because of the cuffs, and she has to get the key out of the marshal's pocket while all of this is happening. The entire plane is shuddering. The alarms are going off. This is terrifying, and she is trying to basically unlock herself so she doesn't die upon impact or even before that. She unlocks her cuffs, gets her own oxygen mask on, and then somehow gets the oxygen mask on the marshal, and then as we are coming in close to her face, we get a blurred shot, and then we're back at the hiking party. I mean, talk about stress. Saeed gently says, "We should keep moving." We shift back to Jack, who is trying to stop the bleeding from the marshal's side. And the marshal is starting to wake up, and Hurley is still passed out next to him. Poor Hurley. But I'm kind of glad he's asleep. He didn't need to experience any of this. The marshal lifts his chest, grabs Jack by the collar, and goes, "Where is she?" Okay, crazy, calm down. Just as Jack is saying, "Who?" we zoom in on Kate's face as she is with the hiking party and they've reached high enough ground. Oh my God. I mean, this show, it's so well done. So well done. The layering of Kate walking on the hiking party, knowing on her face that she is the criminal, and hearing Jack's voice over that scene saying, "Who?" Oh, it's so brilliant. Saeed turns on the transceiver and we have a single bar of signal, and we can kind of hear a woman's voice amidst all the static and like the of the radio. Saeed says that they can't transmit anything because something is already transmitting. And everybody starts to kind of talk over each other, and Charlie's like, "From where?" And Saeed says that the signal is close because it's strong. "Somewhere close? You mean on this island? That's great." And then Boone suggests that maybe it's other survivors, and Shannon is like, "From our plane? How?" And then as Sawyer is asking what kind of transmission, Kate is asking, can we listen to it? And Saeed is trying to hold the transceiver and get a good frequency while all this is happening around him. And he's like, okay, hold on. And then Sawyer's like, there's no transmission. And Kate tells him to shut up. I love it. She's totally had it with him. Because honestly, Sawyer knows, and Kate knows that Sawyer knows. I mean, come on. And then Charlie suggests that maybe it's the rescue party transmitting a warning or a message to them of some kind. And then a French woman's voice speaks through the chaos. And Charlie's like, the French are coming. I've never been so happy to hear the French. And Saeed starts laughing. And Kate's like, okay, but what's she saying? I never took French. And then Saeed asks everyone, does anyone speak French? And then Boone points at Shannon and goes, she does. And Shannon panics and goes, no, I don't. What? And Boone says that she spent a year in Paris, and Shannon insists that she was drinking, not studying. Okay, well, if you're drinking, I mean, you still have to sort of speak French, I guess. I mean, you lived there for a full year. Come on. And then a robotic voice on the radio says, iteration 7, 2, 9, 4, 5. And then Saeed's like, no, the batteries. And Kate asks how much time they have, and it's not much. And Boone says, I've heard you speak French. Listen to it. And Shannon insists that she cannot do this. And I feel like it's just her insecurity of not wanting to mess up and not wanting to let everybody down. But honestly, if you don't listen to it, you are letting everybody down. And then Sawyer asks her, do you speak French or what? Because that would be really nice. The robotic voice again says, iteration 7, 2, 9. And then Charlie's asks, what is that? And Shannon finally goes, it's repeating. And Saeed says, she's right, it's a loop. It's repeating the same message. The iteration is a counter. And the robotic voice continues again with the next number. And no one understands, but Saeed is quickly trying to explain that the iteration is the number of times the message has been repeated. He then starts to do the math, calculating that the message itself is about 30 seconds long. The fact that he can do this kind of math just in his head is beyond me. I cannot math. Shannon starts to cry as she starts to translate the message. She's saying, please come help me. Please come get me. Or she's not, Sawyer yells. You don't even speak French. And I love how our camera is bouncing back and forth between each face, including the people who are not speaking, but reacting to those who are speaking and yelling over one another. It's a really chaotic scene, but at the same time, we don't feel like we are missing any single character in it. Everybody is included in the mass chaos that is happening around this transceiver. Kate yells at Sawyer to let Shannon listen, and Charlie's like, the battery, you guys. Shannon grabs the transceiver and holds it against her ear with both hands and continues to cry as she says, I'm alone now. I'm alone on the island, all alone. Please, someone come. The others, they're dead. It killed them. It killed them all. And then the static takes over and the battery runs out. 16 years, Saeed says. 16 years and 5 months. That's the count. How, Saeed? How did you do this math? Like, it's impressive. It's insane. It's crazy. Wow. I need him on my team. And they're all like, I'm sorry, what? And he says the iterations, it's a distress call, a mayday. If the counter's right, it's been repeating over and over for 16 years. And as he speaks, the camera slowly begins to spin rather than be choppy, taking in all of their faces as the music gets more intense and more suspenseful. And Kate suggests that maybe someone came for them. And Sawyer's like, if someone came, why is it still playing? And honestly, he's already accepted defeat, which says a lot about who he is. And then we get Charlie's iconic line as he looks up at the mountains and he's like, guys, where are we? Boom. End credits. What? I mean, I can't. Full body chills every single time. Devastating to think you would have to wait an entire week just to watch the next episode. Unreal. Completely unreal. And that is our pilot episode of Lost, Part 2. Like I said, I can't believe that both of these parts were separated into 2 weeks of airing. Just cruel. So cruel. I hope if you've never seen it before that I have at least gotten you excited about what this show is all about, and maybe you'll seek it out for yourself. I believe it's on Hulu right now. I sincerely hope you have enjoyed this episode of Let's Rewatch It Again. If you have any comments, questions, reviews, or maybe a request of a TV show episode or movie you would like me to rewatch and feature on the show, you can send it to me at letsrewatchitagain@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Let's Rewatch It Again. And we have a YouTube channel. So if you prefer to watch your content, you can also view this exact same episode of Let's Rewatch It Again on YouTube. The channel name is Let's Rewatch It Again Podcast. Then you can see my face. Nothing extravagant about it, but we're here wearing a Star Wars shirt today. Until next time, I'll catch you on the flippity flip.